minutes, and I'm so glad for that. Massy Arts Society is an indigenous-led, indigenous-owned space that is also connected to Massy Books, which you might know of on East Georgia. And as an indigenous-owned space, the call to decolonize is one that we take rather seriously. As a person who's recently working at Massy Arts, for me that has meant thinking about how I can really sit with the tension of a word like decolonize, anti-colonial. As a poet, I often, there's an urge to make everything metaphorical, and so what I have to sit with and what I invite you all to sit with is the understanding that decolonization is not actually a metaphor, we have to do the work of making decolonization something other than figurative, and so in whatever ways you can think to do that, please do. We have to do our best to interrupt the colonial story that's interrupting so many other stories on this land. And so, as you know, Vancouver, or the place colonially known as Vancouver, is sitting upon the traditional unsurrendered territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And so I invite you to, decolonize in all the ways that we can. And so with that said, just some light housekeeping. There are washrooms behind you. There are books for sale. That's what we're here for. I have the extreme pleasure of being in conversation with some of Western Canada, some of the country's most luminary authors, and we also have a musical guest, which I will introduce you to presently. For the musical opening, we are joined by Khari McClelland. Imaginative, bold, genuine, and hopeful, Khari McClelland is an award-winning musician and creative facilitator who uses arts and experimental activities for transformational learning. Based in Vancouver, Khari has worked with communities across Africa, Australia, Europe, Turtle Island, and the Caribbean. Join me in welcoming our musical opener for the evening, Khari McClelland.
Thank you. And thank you for coming today. And thank the authors for writing those amazing books that take a long time and a lot of effort. It's not easy work, so I'm grateful. One of the things that I also feel grateful for in the work that both of these authors create is something that puts flesh and bone on what can be caricatures. I think Black people and Black life in general, but also specifically in Canada, can have the feeling of being caricatured. And I feel like the work of both of these individuals goes a long way in terms of putting flesh to the bones, putting character, love, desire, wants, dreams, hopes, and imaginations to people. And so I'm grateful to both of you. And I'm going to read a very quick quote from Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which is, "Slavery is not an indefinable mass of flesh. It is a particular, specific enslaved woman whose mind is as active as your own, whose range of feeling is as vast as your own, who prefers the way the light falls in one particular spot in the woods, who enjoys fishing where the water eddies in a nearby stream, who loves her mother in her own complicated way, thinks her sister talks too loud, has a favorite cousin, a favorite season, excels at dressmaking and knows inside herself that she is as intelligent and capable as anyone. Slavery is not an indefinable mass of flesh. Slavery is not an indefinable mass of flesh. Slavery is not an indefinable mass of flesh. It is a particular. I want to start by saying that there are so many journeys in terms of, Black people in Canada, so many different ways that people have come here, some very recent and some long ago. Some people have been in continuous Black settlements here for a very long time. And some people are very recently coming and from everywhere you could imagine. And not just Africa, but Black people are now everywhere in the world there are people. And so when you see a Black person, the possibility for where they might be coming from is very wide, the range of possibility. But I'm going to give you something that's very specific about my story and about the people that I come from, because this is the tradition that I come from. And it isn't better, but it is something that I love and I think is very powerful. I was born in Detroit, Michigan. I was born in the crucible of Black women's love. I was raised by Leona May and Kathy McClelland. And something that makes me understand and feel and know who I am and where I come from is those early moments of being in a space with many Black people around me, and I particularly feel a sense of resonance with the image of the elders' hands, often on long benches or pews, sometimes in school assemblies, but this song would be a song that was always sung first before anything happened. And it was a song that was written in the period just after enslavement had occurred, and there was a sense of hope and possibility that was occurring in Black communities. And I know that this song was sung in Canada, and it was also sung in the United States, but also during emancipation celebrations, which used to be shared celebrations for Black communities across borders, across the Canadian and US border, specifically in the place that I come from. Both my mother and father's lineage are people who escaped enslavement and went into southern Ontario, but then later returned into the United States, and specifically into Detroit. This is a song by two siblings. I always liked that, the idea of siblings singing together and creating music together. It's called Lift Every Voice and Sing. Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening sky. Let it resound loud as a rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat Father's side. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading a path through the blood of the slaughtered, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our Father sighed, facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Let us march on till victory is won. There's a little bit of some funky beats going on. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but this. Yeah, I wrote a song. I had a project which I actually communicated with Wayde about a long time ago called Freedom Singer. And it was a journey in which I was trying to trace the footsteps of my great-great-great-grandmother, Kizzy. And I might ask you to say her name with me on the count of 3. Kizzy. So 1, 2, 3. Kizzy. Thank you. I say her name because it's a way for me to regain a sense of myself, feel a sense of groundedness, but also to have this awareness of my right to my own body, my own dreams and imaginings. This is not something that we can take for granted, that we all might have this right to our own bodies and our own imaginings, our own dreams and aspirations and hopes for ourselves or that of our children. So it allows me to stand and sit inside myself in a way when I say her name or when I think about her. So I did this journey where I traced all across, Canada, trying to find songs that might have been brought by people who were fleeing enslavement coming into Canada in the 1800s and before. And went to Halifax and Ontario, went to archives, went everywhere, and I found these, I see nothing but the eyes, but a lot of these eyes look familiar, so forgive me, I get stuck, I had a hiccup there, I was like, I know those eyeballs. Yeah, so I tried to find the songs that might have accompanied Kizzy on her journey as she fled into Canada. And as a result, I came across a periodical called The Voice of the Fugitive. And I love that title, The Voice of the Fugitive. It's like, a lot of people are like, oh, we can't break the rules, oh, shit, like you broke a law. And like, the idea that your very person, that you freeing yourself would be illegal, that you would be a fugitive for allowing your body to move in the ways it most wants to, it longs to be next to who it longs to be next to live where you would hope and dream to live. Like, that's amazing to me. The voice of the fugitive. So I always keep that in the back of my mind. Where is the fugitivity in me? Where am I trying to break through things that need to be broken through. At any rate, there's a song that I found, and I changed a little bit of lyrics. You'll notice in the second verse it may feel a bit more contemporary, but also it mostly remains true to the original lyric. I put my own melody and chord progressions to the tune. I feel like maybe the original melody was something like, you know, my Bonnie flies over the ocean. They used to do that a lot. They'd have a fixed melody that was very popular in its time, and they would just change the lyrics. So I put new music to it. But I hope that you would sing with me. It's going to be pretty simple for you to join me. All you have to say is, mm-hmm. I feel like y'all can do this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna stop doing it and I'm gonna see if you got it, okay? Here we go. Mm-hmm. You're beautiful. I think we can do it. Cease to agitate, we will, when the slave whip sound is still. Mm-hmm. When no more on guiltless limb, fetters cut their circlet grim. Mm-hmm. When no more hounds thirst for blood, scoring the thorny Georgian woods. Mm-hmm. When no more a mother's pleading prayer quivers on the southern air. On that day, we will be family equal, born and free. Dawn will come, night will cease, we'll rejoice, mind at ease. For that day we'll work and wait. That's when we'll cease to agitate. That's when we. You can sing that with me. Let's try this again. That's when we will cease to agitate. That's when we will cease to agitate. Well, here we are today, still pushing for equal pay. Mm-hmm. And these treaty rights don't hold. They're shiny like the Judas gold. Mm-hmm. And the stain of blood remains, a mother's only son slain. Mm-hmm. And our youth keep crying out for more, continually being ignored. On that day, we will be family equal, born and free. Dawn will come, night will cease, we'll rejoice, mind at ease. For that day we'll work and wait. That's when we'll cease to agitate. That's when we will 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 cease to agitate. I'm fairly certain that I have overstayed my time. Thank you so very much for making space for me to welcome you. I hope I bring an energy to the room that will support the work that you are to do next. So much appreciation for you and the work that you do. I said that Wayde was a real inspiration for my journey during my work on Freedom Singer. So again, just want to lift you up and say thank you.
Thank you. Another round of applause for Khari. Khari and I have never met, but now, yeah, I'm so glad that we have. Because, I don't know, because, you know, the way you occupied that space was so righteous. Because it's like easy enough, I don't want to say easy enough, but it's one thing to sing a song, and it's another thing to like ground yourself and us in the purpose of like what we're here for. So thank you for the recognition. Yeah, at this time I'd like to welcome Wayde Compton and Suzette Mayr to the stage. Yeah. So the way this is going to work, if I have my P's and Q's in order, is that both authors will do a brief reading, then I will ask a few questions, we'll have a discussion for your enjoyment, and then we'll open questions up to the audience. So like, you know, listen and be present, but also like, you know, the hard-hitting, poignant, loving, compassionate questions, like be mulling them over as things are happening. So firstly, I will introduce Wayde Compton. Wayde Compton has written 5 books and has edited 2 literary anthologies. His collection of short stories, The Outer Harbor, won the City of Vancouver Book Award in 2015, and he won a National Magazine Award for Fiction in 2011. His work has been a finalist for 2 other City of Vancouver Book Awards, as well as the Dorothy Livesay Poetry Prize. In 2006, Wayde co-founded Commodore Books, Western Canada's first Black Canadian literary press. Wayne has been writer-in-residence at Simon Fraser University, Green College at the University of British Columbia, and Vancouver Public Library. From 2012 to 2018, he administrated the creative writing program in continuing studies at SFU, including the award-winning Writers Studio. His latest book, The Blue Road, a fantasy graphic novel for young adults, is illustrated by April Delanoche Milne, was called A Touching Allegory of the Unexpected and Burdensome Trials of Migration. Join me in welcoming Wayde Compton.
So thinking about history and specifically Hogan's Alley, so you might know, so you know, on the one hand I'm a writer, and on the other hand I've done a bunch of cultural activism around Vancouver's original Black community that was in the East End in the mid-20th century that was displaced by a freeway project during urban renewal. I have a few poems that address that, and I'm going to read them. So this is called Blight. When redacted take redacted pictures of redacted, there are no people there. The decay will speak for itself. Nothing in the city is older than space, nothing closer than time. Muted, 8-balled, low, crisscrossed and fameless, half-named, enghosted, False Creek 2, redacted. Instead of a shutter, it could have been an opener, a closer, a closure, a closed test, a fluttery. The quarries where Blake's bricks of piety got. Moses dispromised himself for the absence of possible blocks. The occlusion blues down in the bottom when City Hall puts redacted understudy. There are whole languages built out of how redacted aren't. Whole forts, absences chopped down, hewn into beams and raised. Redacted drove by and shot none of redacted. None of redacted have ever been too much put out about, souls being captured and such, like redacted like to say. all that whistling Dixie, mumbo jumbo. But wherever redacted lay redacted's hat, next to the X False Creek salt flats, the eyes are windows to the soul, redacted say. And redacted say it plain, see, and redacted say it right back in my ever-loving way. I'm thinking about a lot lately about absences, what's lacuna, what's left out of texts, right? And that's one. In that fantasy graphic novel for kids that I wrote, the protagonist's name is Lacuna for that reason. The New Station. It's alchemical work spinning meaning out of meandering, more than 40 years wheeling in the back 40. Every time I drive downtown, I go over the remains. I transform, I translate. Once 17, riding shotgun with my lead-footed friend Danny Lee, he changed lanes left to the middle, bore left just as another car in the far left panned right, both vehicles veering like lodestones to the metal other, the center. Danny yanked the wheel back quick enough to deliver us from collision. I return to this every time I cross this overpass. I'm keying on my PC now towards this terminus, breaking and entering along the old train station, rising at Terminal Avenue, and the vanished New Station Cafe I've only read of, the Strathcona hub, behind which the VPD dispatched Clarence Clemens for knowing Dolores Dingman. To the mixed children they never got to beget, I compute, farewell, arrive, arrive. And that's referring to a case of where the Vancouver police killed a longshoreman named Clarence Clemens. Well, the black community kind of knew it was because he was living with a white woman, and a certain cop was harassing him and following him around. Eventually they beat him to death. A celebrated case in the 50s. The last thing I'll read. Ghetto Fabulous Ozymandias. The narrator was on Main, looking up the slope between two lanes of the Georgia Viaduct, there between Union and Pryor. He had a camera, a portable eye, he thought, and he aimed it up at a 45-degree angle, and back, snapping with his index digits tip on the sweet spot. There were words on the curved concrete he couldn't suss, but he got them in the frame still. While his eye was pressed to the viewfinder, a figure rose up in the potential picture, a man under a dusty coat. Too much, garlands of curling telephone cord, unlaced North Stars, a fraying toque, unmatching gloves, cracked Wayfarer knockoffs on. When he lowered the camera, the man was gone. When he looked through the viewfinder again, the man was there, down, gone, through, there. Who are you? The narrator said, feeling strange, speaking with the camera up to his face. But only this way could he keep the individual from evanescing. I live here, the man said, waving at a pile of sleeping bags wedged between the concrete confluence. So since you're in my house, you're the one who ought to be announcing yourself. Okay, the narrator said, I'm the narrator. Pleased to meet you. I can only see you through the camera. When I lower it, you go. So don't lower it, said the man, pointing at the spray-painted tag on the concrete behind him. That is me. The narrator could just now comprehend the tag. Reverend Oz, you're a preacher, the narrator said, the viewfinder still at his eye. The camera was like a mask pressed to his face, so. Don't I look like I could be a preacher? You look homeless. I am. Where's your church? Churchless too. Is there anything you do have? I've got names. Names? I've got more names than you can shake a stick at. Like what? Like Oz, like The Wiz, and the other one too. Who? Ozymandias. I see. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. The narrator lowered the camera and Rev Oz was gone. He squinted at the tag. It was still there. The script ducking and interlacing, weaving into itself, looping. He lifted the camera to his eye again. There was Rev Oz. There's something I don't understand, the narrator said. What? Said Rev Oz. Shelley's poem was about arrogance. Yes. But this place, he said, swinging his head side to side like a horizontal gyroscope, the camera at his face still, now settling its lens back on the man. This place, the community that was here, they were driven out. Their neighborhood was flattened by the city. There's nothing left here because of an injustice. It doesn't make sense to call the targets of this unfairness arrogant, to put them in Ozymandias' shoes. Sure it does, said the image. How does it make sense? It is arrogant to disappear. The narrator realized. His index twitched, it clicked. He lowered the camera and looked.
Suzette Mayr is the author of 6 novels, including her most recent, The Sleeping Car Porter, winner of the 2022 Social Bank Giller Award, and longlist nominee for the Republic of Consciousness Prize, US and Canada. Mayr's other novel won the Relit Award and City of Calgary W.O. Mitchell Book Prize, and been nominated for the Scotiabank Giller Prize, the Commonwealth Prize for Best Book in Canada, Caribbean region, the Writers Guild of Alberta's Best First Book and Best Novel Awards, and the Farrell Grumley Award for LGBTQ fiction. Mayr has done interdisciplinary work with Calgary Theatre Company, Theatre Junction, visual artists Lisa Braun and Jeff Hunter, and she was a writer in residence at Whittier University in Pennsylvania. She is the former president of the Writers Guild of Alberta. Mayr teaches creative writing at the University of Calgary. Join me in welcoming Suzette Mayr.
Thank you so much, and it's so wonderful to be here in Vancouver and to be with such an amazing artist. This is a real honor. I'm going to read briefly from The Sleeping Car Porter, just 5 minutes or so, and for those of you who don't know, The Sleeping Car Porter is a historical novel set in 1929. It's about a sleeping car porter named Baxter, and one thing to know is that up until about, well into the 20th century, or, like 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, sleeping car porters were primarily black men, and for being a sleeping car porter was pretty much the highest you could go in terms of the railway, and and the porters faced a lot of adverse conditions, like not enough sleep, not very good food, unbelievable hours, all kinds of conditions. So this section that I'm going to read is from the perspective of Baxter, who I should also mention is a closeted gay man, and this becomes an issue for him when this particular train trip gets stuck in the mountains. This scene involves a flashback to when Baxter was a porter in porter training school, and when he was even younger, growing up on an unnamed Caribbean island. And the reason I left out the name of the island was because, not for any really smart literary reason, but because I was afraid my mom would find out and get mad at me, so I left it. Anyway, so here we go. Flinging along metal tracks in his luxurious prison somewhere between Medicine Hat and Calgary, Baxter thinks about his former porter instructor, Edwin Drew. Mr. Drew in his finely cleaned and pressed monkey suit, sailing around like a king of England with his precise pronunciation, his brain a full set of Encyclopedia Britannica as he showed the new porters all stuffed into the off-duty car how to make down and make up a berth, how to fold a blanket exactly by drawing the blanket from the foot to the head, how to shake the curtain to quietly wake up a passenger who has to detrain in the night, how to use the whisk broom on a male passenger's jacket, an ostrich feather duster for cobwebs, how to sponge then dry off a washstand without leaving smears or blots or cloudy patches, the code names for mice, otherwise known as diamonds, rats, or sapphires, roaches, which are rubies, and bed bugs, otherwise known as pearls, in a car. How to deal with ladies having lady issues. How to deal with men having men issues. How to deal with drunk passengers. Make them drunker, declared Mr. Drew, and he winked at Baxter while all the student porters laughed. How to deal with passengers who'd had too much to drink the night before. How to deal with a disorderly woman or sporting girl plying her wares on the train. How to calm down the sleep talkers, the sleepwalkers. How to know the time it takes for a train to travel from Chicago to Smith Falls or from Duluth to Sault Ste. Marie. The infinite number of protocol crimes that could earn demerits, such as disloyalty, dishonesty, the use of intoxicating liquors or frequenting of places where they are sold, immorality, insubordination, incompetence, gross carelessness, untruthfulness. How to look in the little instruction handbook with its cardboard covers they all have to carry if they have any questions about the rules. Edwin Drew had a wide, clear face, sported wide shoulders, and Baxter wondered if he engaged in calisthenics. But when Baxter took a turn to show how he knew how to make up a berth, he had to shove the lower mattress into the upper berth and shove the berth back into place with all his might, sweat pouring down the sides of his head, his eyeglasses sliding down his nose, skating down the nervous moisture. He suddenly understood why Mr. Drew's shoulders and arms wielded so much power, how he swirled and folded sheets like a bullfighter, and snapped up and snapped down the ponderous, heavy berths from the ceiling as though they were made of cloud. He will not think about his parents back home. He hasn't written a letter in months, maybe even a year. He smooths out his upper lip as he chews a cold pierogi, his mother praying over him, the time she slapped his face because he twirled one too many times in front of his female cousins. He was the best twirler of all of them, the best somersaulter of all of them. Baxter likes the cold of Canada. Even though he was born in the tropics, he droops in the island's tropical heat. The island where he grew up, hemmed in by ocean he could walk to on all sides if he had time enough. The island hemmed in by aunts and uncles and cousins and friends of cousins and aunts and uncles who all knew his mother, knew his father, knew when he woke up, when he went to bed, when he walked down a different street than usual, just for a change. All the aunts and uncles and cousins and friends of cousins, aunts and uncles who liked to remind him about the time his mother's lace-trimmed handkerchief fell out of his pocket at school, and they never let him forget it. He wanted to be Captain Nemo and travel far, far away. Nemo? Asked his Aunt Araminta. Nobody, he said. I don't want anybody to know me. She said. Mobilis immobili, he said. Eat your conch, she said. He misses crunching his teeth into Araminta's cracked conch. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. I must confess, I got a little bit excited at the mention of Baxter's name because obviously I've read the book, and I'm excited for all of you to get to know Baxter through this conversation, and I hope you buy the book because, Baxter's a wonderfully compelling character. So thank you for Baxter. I want to start maybe a little bit broadly. In the opening of this event, Khari had thanked you for just the effort of writing a book. For arriving at the place where you can hold all of that thinking, all of that emotion, all of that intellect, blood, sweat, and tears in a physical artifact. And as a writer too, I know how many different questions, how many different concerns get subsumed or buried into a single work of literature. And so I'm wondering for both of you, what were the sort of guiding questions that led you to write the particular books that you wrote? So in your case, the Sleeping Car Porter and also The Blue Road.
There's something that Toni Morrison once said, I think it was in Oprah magazine or something like that, but she said, and a lot of people have repeated this, just because I think it's so inspiring, where she said, if you cannot find the book you want to read, you must write it. And so that was a hugely guiding principle for me, because what I was really hungry for was a book about a Black queer person in Canada's history, in Canadian history, and that book just didn't exist. And I also needed a book that had a happy ending, really. I just was really sad and tired of reading about Black pain and victimhood, and so I thought, you know what? This book is going to have a goddamn happy ending. Everything's going to be great. So that was my impulse for writing this book, was in a way, you know, to read that book and also see where I might fit into that history as a Black queer person. Yeah.
I might answer this in terms of what I'm working on now, like a project that's still in process. So I'm writing about, I started this last summer and I'm going to continue it this summer, but I'm writing what may or may not become a memoir, but at least right now is an overblown essay, I guess, that, about my adoption. I was adopted at birth in a kind of unusual adoption, I think. And it was something I never really thought I was going to write about, but now that I'm writing about it, it's starting to tell me some things about myself and in my writing life, in terms of being. Well, what I'm doing is I'm looking at, so I have a fairly extensive file of papers around my adoption, what they call their non-identifying information that I got from the ministry years ago. And I decided to look at it like a piece of writing, like it's a piece of literature, and sort of read through it and analyze it. Because there are drafts in there of like interviews with my birth mother, and then those are crafted into a letter that was to go with me when I was adopted, which tells me a certain version of the story of my adoption, which is different from the original. So there are sort of layers in it, and I'm analyzing it that way, and just thinking about myself as almost like a literary work, you know, like a character, and realizing that I've kind of always thought that in some ways, right, that I was constructed by this kind of document, and race is there, of course, as the kind of determinant of my life, quite literally, right? Where I was placed, because I was a mixed-race kid born into the system, and then adopted by an interracial couple, which is the unusual part, right? So, you know, the chances of that happening in 1972 were very, very slim, and I was very, very lucky to end up with my parents, right? But I'm sort of fascinated by all those things. So I'm thinking about research and just thinking about getting to the bottom of things, and realize, well, that's what I've done in a variety of different ways, of all the historical work that I've done and all of that. I've been looking for origins for a long time in different ways, or racial or historical or cultural or civic or whatever. So now I'm getting back around to the original thing that may have been one of the reasons for that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I love that people have the impulse to clap. That's how you know you've been profound. Yeah. It reminds me of just the truth of how like we're all kind of made of stories. Like one of the overwhelming, let's say, richnesses of being a writer or being a person is like reckoning with how many stories we come from, you know. And I think that's maybe one of the things that's at the heart of this conversation. And so it brings me to my second question. Wayde, in The Blue Road, the guard at the border, he has a line. He says, "Leaving, arriving, returning, those are all words for the same thing, starting over." And that was like a super poignant thing for me to think about, because I reckoned with it in two ways. One, in the way that, like, as we talk about migrations, many Black people in Canada have had to start over in that way of, like, you know, like in my parents' case, let's say, like, I've come from Barbados, I've come from Jamaica, and I'm starting over. But then also, part of the history of Black people in Canada, I think, is the starting over that comes from a certain kind of cultural erasure, like from government. So Hogan's Alley is one example, Africville in Halifax. And then I'm thinking about how the act of storytelling, the act of reckoning with history in the ways that both of you have, is a way of suggesting that we don't have to start completely over. You know, because in every city, Black people are looking for each other. Like, where do I start, you know? how do I come to this place and like not start completely over? And I think the stories that we tell, both in novels and otherwise, are part of how we suggest that, like, oh, like we are here, we've been here. Like, you know, start with Wayde Compton, start with Suzette Mayr, like, you know, find the stories because we are here. And so I just wanted to, yeah, is there anything you can say about this role of storytelling or writing in suggesting that Black presence is something that is ongoing and has been here for a while?
Yeah, part of that's in reference to that feeling of starting over again all the time is the where are you from question. You know, you could be here for, George Eliot Clark tells a story of taking a cab ride to a festival we were at and saying, you know, the entire time the cab driver was trying to ask him in a variety of ways where he's from. And this is a person who's like a 7th generation Canadian, right? a Black man. And so the perennial, you know, displacement of that question, right? So where are you from? So it's almost like always arriving. And in the Blue Road, that's part of the allegory of when she arrives at the city after this long kind of migration process. It's a fantasy. So they're in the city. They have to. The people who don't come from the city have to walk around with these mirrors in front of them all the time. And if they look away from the mirror for too long, they'll die. So they have to stare at themselves in the mirror and navigate through the city with it, which for me was a metaphor for that experience of being forced to reconsider yourself and not feel at ease in the place that you've come to.
Wow.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
That question is super hard. So I think one thing I do want to mention is that Wayde was a huge help for the writing of my book. I don't think I could have embarked on it. I wouldn't have had the confidence to do that without you having done the work you did. Yes, really. And yeah. And I have to tell you that the work you did in rediscovering Hogan's Alley, I don't know what the language is. I still have, you know, there's that special issued stamp. And I still have those, and they're sort of my talisman, and they were my talisman while I was writing this book, because it was a very strange experience to you know, feel in my bones that a character like the one in my book existed. I know he did, I absolutely know he did, but there was no evidence of him having existed because he would have been erased. He would not have been, you know, seen as worthy of being recorded in archives and in historical records outside of criminal reports or, you know, police records, those kinds of documents. And so the work you did, you know, I found myself, and I hope this kind of addresses your question, which I think is a really complicated, interesting one. You know, I walked through different cities that were big train station cities. So Vancouver, Winnipeg, Montreal. I walked through those old Black neighborhoods, and you know, in Vancouver it's gone, right? In Winnipeg, it's still there, kind of. In Montreal, it's gone, but you know, without your work, I wouldn't have known what to look for. Even there's still traces. There's still traces, you know. So, I guess the work of a writer, or my work as a writer, was to not turn back time, but sort of scrape away, in as best a way I could, scrape away all of the concrete, you know, sort of reverse the erasure and bring that time back to life, bring those people back to life. I don't know if that helps at all, if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all answers are good answers. You know, before this event, you know, we were just sitting in the back and we were talking like, oh, like, porters are kind of like in the zeitgeist right now, like, you know, telling stories about borders is like, it seems to be like one of the most accessible touch points by which we can explore recent Black Canadian history, because because in telling Porter stories you get the story of multiple migrations, you know, so like people like literally coming from other places and traveling the country. You get all of the tensions bound up in like Black labor, you know, under racism and capitalism, you know, and so I wonder, and also the community building piece, where like, you know, as you were just mentioning, like part of the way that Black communities developed in the last century was through like porters, you know, developing communities in all the places that they would stop, you know. And so it makes me think about Baxter as the central figure of your book, and sort of how you arrived at his, what I want to describe as like complex desire, but also like extreme alienation. So in some ways he's like alienated from his work, in some ways he's alienated from his imagination, and all these tensions that go into, yeah, being a Black porter. What can you say about that?
It reminds me a little bit of what Khari was mentioning before, the piece that he read or was referencing about the enslaved woman, you know, who doesn't get along with her sister or prefers, you know, the sunset, you know, at a certain time of year, and that kind of individuality and uniqueness which has been lost as we think about history in broad strokes. And I think for when I was writing the character Baxter, he started out as very much a general, generic, here is a sleeping car porter, at least what I think sleeping car porters might have been like kind of character. And it wasn't until I started tapping into him as an individual, you know, as in somebody who has his own unique take on the world. And part of that was having to journey within myself, frankly. You know, he kind of came to life for me when I figured out that, you know, I thought if I had to travel to 1929, if I was a man, if I was working on trains, you know, what would I be doing to try to escape that situation? And I thought, I would be trying to read. I would try to read my way out. What would I be reading? Well, I kind of like psychological horror. I like reading horror. So probably he'd be reading Dracula and Weird Tales and The Beetle by Richard Marsh. You know, he'd be thinking about aliens and H.G. Wells. And so I thought, he's a nerd. How perfect is that? You know, and so that was how I started tapping into who he could be as an individual. And in doing that, you know, I had to think about all the other porters and what their unique tastes and preferences were. The building of that character was it was hard, and it took a really, really long time, but I figured out that, you know, once I could determine what his passions were, what he loved, what he disliked, then I could figure out who he was, and he would stop being this cardboard cutout or caricature, you know, just to borrow Khari's words again, yeah.
I love Baxter for that reason. Like, yeah, because it would have been, you would have been able to get away with the more generic, you know, because you have sort of the tension and weight and beauty and richness of like history on your side. Like, oh, these stories don't often get told, but like, there is a sublime interiority to Baxter that's like really, really compelling. Like, he's somebody that I, relate to and would want to know. So thank you for making Baxter as human as he is. If you had read the book by now, you would like, there'd be raucous applause in the I wasn't joking, I wasn't making for it. I'm just saying, you will love Baxter as much as I love Baxter. That brings me to another question about, you could say form or genre, you know, because I suppose as writers, as people, as thinkers, there are several potential access points to all of the stories that we deem worthy of telling, you know, especially in terms of history. And so I'm wondering, for you, Wayde, why the fable was, you know, expedient or efficient or useful, and then Suzette, in the case of the sleeping car porter, the element of like magic realism, the space of like, this is also a hyper-real story that becomes surreal or magical. So if you could both talk about, the ways that the poetics of the fable and the poetics of magic realism impacted the story that you told.
Well, the story that became the Blue Road, the graphic novel for children, was originally a short story in my first book of mostly poems. which was, there's a couple sections of it that are about the black pioneers to Victoria in the 19th century. And so, speaking of that, which is not mentioned, right, in history, because there's a good conventional history about the black pioneers to Victoria by Crawford Killian called Go Do Some Great Thing that's excellent, really well written, and thoroughly researched. But I was thinking about what poetry can do with that story. And I was interested in the people who were there that you don't really see in history, including children, because that black population was not like most other immigrant populations in BC, which were usually itinerant single men coming, right? That's the standard pattern. But this was an entire community. It was half the black population of San Francisco came all during one summer. Their whole families. It was they were leaving the United States deliberately as expats. It was not economic migration. So there were kids there, and every once in a while you get a sense that there were kids, but you don't hear their voices or really see them or anything. And so I wrote what I imagine might be a fairy tale told that kind of echoed the experience they had gone through. So that's in there. But I wrote that when I was 27. So when I had a kid, when my daughter was born in 2008, it's the closest thing I've written to anything for children. And so I was kind of waiting until she would get old enough and I could read this to her. It's like one thing, right? And so she got to be around, she was about 5 or 6, and I was like, Daddy wrote a fairy tale. Do you want me to read this to you? And she's like, yeah. And so I pulled that out, and finally, and so I started reading it to her. And kids are super honest critics. Like she was just page 2, she just shut down. Do other things. And I was like, no, this is my one. Doesn't like it at all, right? And but I realized, I wrote it when I was 27. I wasn't around very many kids, and wasn't really written for kids. It's kind of an ironic fairy tale. And so I quickly redirected and just said, okay, never mind that. Let me just tell you the story. Is that okay? And she's like, okay, sure. And then I told her the story off the top of my head, and that she liked. And so I started thinking, well, what's the difference? How did I tell it differently when I just, improvised it from memory? And, I simplified the language and this and that. So it started me thinking about so in terms of form, that's where that idea was born. I started thinking, well, I didn't really write this for kids the first time, so what if I did? And then she liked graphic novels, and she liked visual art, so it ended up becoming a graphic novel for kids.
So the book has a moment. So the main character Baxter doesn't get a lot of sleep, and so as the book progresses and he gets even less sleep, he becomes quite exhausted and starts hallucinating. And so there's a tension between, is he actually hallucinating, or are the people or the objects or the different things he's seeing, are they actually real? And so that's kind of the question mark. And I guess it comes from, I have always adored magic realism, and I think it's because it is a mode of writing that it was the mode of writing that was seriously fashionable when I was coming of age, right? So it was like people were talking about Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude, Isabel Allende, all kinds of writers were doing just incredible writing. And I tried to think about, why does that writing appeal to me so much? And I think it's in part because, there's the argument that magic realism is not actually about fantasy. It's about describing a reality that, a European dominant culture wouldn't necessarily know about. So for example, I live in Alberta, I live in Calgary, and we're near the mountains, and we have this phenomenon, we have this wind where you can have within 10 minutes, the temperature can go from -20 to +20, and it's called a Chinook, and it's real. But if you describe that to anybody else, that's magic realism, right? So it's about describing your unique reality. And as far as this book goes, and I suppose my other books, magic realism lets me explore metaphor as reality. So what happens when you make metaphor literal? And that can be so powerful when you are trying to write about experiences that are not commonly written about, so being a biracial person, or the fact that I am descended from Nazis and enslaved people. You know, there's that, I embody that. So, you know, what do you do with that? All you can do is poetry. You
said it with so much angst in your face, and I get it. Poetry is, yeah, it's, poetry is a beast, but we love it. Wonderful. Wayde, as a poet, do you have anything to add to this metaphorical?
That's about right.
Just checking. Now feels like a good time to take some questions from the audience, if there are any. Yep, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Camilla. I think something I'm really curious about as a young creator is how do you begin to trust yourselves and all that sort of thing? Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, they just asked, as a young creator, how do you begin to trust yourself, is the question.
Can you just elaborate a little bit? So what's happening? What makes you not trust yourself, I suppose, is my question.
Well, I believe that everyone has a story to tell, and I think, in looking at myself, the question is, I need to say something, and will it come out right when it's coming from my voice?
So come out right as in other people will understand it, or you will understand it?
I think both.
Okay, because my advice would be, don't think about audience. Audience doesn't matter, because if you could write to audience, we would all be writing bestsellers, you know, but we're not. And so all you can do is, I think, go back to that, you know, that idea that Toni Morrison has, which is that, you know, you want to write the book or create the art that you want to see, that you want to consume. And I can guarantee that if it's powerful for you, it's going to be powerful for at least another 5 people on the planet, probably more, right? And I wonder if sometimes there's maybe too much of an emphasis, and I hope I'm understanding your question correctly. I wonder if there's sometimes too much of an emphasis on how our work will be received by other people as opposed to what matters to you, and working with integrity and, you know, doing the best you can in terms of craft to get to create a piece of art that you are satisfied with. And also the other thing to keep in mind is that it takes practice. You know, I know that feeling of frustration where you have the idea of a piece of art in your head and then you put it on the page or you put it in the, you know, the metal or the ceramics or the paint and it's not quite what you wanted. That's okay, because you can always do another project. You can always create another piece of work, and as you go, your chops are going to get more and more refined so that as you go, what's in your head is going to start matching more and more the thing on the page. But that's not to say the thing on the page is not good if it doesn't necessarily match what's going on in your head. It's, you know, there could be other forces at work. You could have subconscious passions that you just don't know about that appear over and over and over again. I don't know, Wayde, help me.
I'm glad you said practice, because I teach this to my students, right, is that, you know, every other art form, every other art discipline, pretty much, right, has built into the idea of practicing things, like doing it just to do it, to get better at it, except writing. Everybody who's writing something thinks the thing they're writing has got to be the final thing, right? And if you feel like if it's not heading towards being, you know, the final published thing, then there's no point in doing it. But that's not true. It's like any other art. Like musicians practice all the time. They play stuff that's not intended to be recorded or whatever, right? And I think that is really important, right? That's a great principle. I think that's true. For me, in terms of my writing projects, every writing project that I do starts with, this is what helps me anyway, starts with a question, So that's my motivation, is I have some question about something, like could I do this, or how does this work, or what does this presence mean to me? And then in the writing, I try to answer that question. For me, I think if you ask an honest question and then try to answer it honestly in your writing, then I think you're on the right track. And that's not really worrying too much about who else is going to read it later. But then you do find that other people, often have had that same question too, or questions that are similar to it, and then they'll go along with you in your work to discover the answer that you've discovered. For me, that's the way I think about it. That kind of fleshes out some of those problems and rockets.
I would also think about joy, right? Which is while you're making your art, is there, even when it's difficult, do you still feel joy? Do you still enjoy it? Because it becomes difficult when you're not enjoying what you're doing. And I think that's when you can kind of stall. And sometimes the joy comes from strange places. Sometimes it can be unpredictable places, or places that are not, considered cool, as one would say. You know what I mean? So I'm getting old, and I don't know what the kids say nowadays.
Cool
anyway,
is cool.
It's cool.
I mean, I'm old too, but
Yeah.
cool is
So just finding that joy, finding that pursuing that thread that lights that spark, lights the spark inside of you, that keeps the fire, gets the fire going.
Wonderful. I mean, there's a whole seminar unfolding right now. I wanna keep it going, but I also want to make room for other questions. Are there any other? Yeah.
You said in your book that you wanted to have a happy ending. And in our book club, we had the feeling, or some of us had the feeling, that the ending was hopeful, albeit very improbable.
Okay, so without spoiling the book.
Yeah.
So the book club, this book club is saying that the ending is hopeful, but improbable.
Yeah, like, I don't think that's going to happen, was what somebody said.
What?
But we wanted it to.
Okay, how can I say this without wrecking the book? All right, so what he wants probably won't happen in Canada, but if he moves to the States, he can probably do it.
Oh. And we all say, why? Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll just leave it there.
We love a good cliffhanger.
We're going to have another book club.
Anybody else? Yeah, this.
Hello, my name is Adina, and thank you so much for your work. I deeply appreciate that you continue to talk about Black joy and Black presence and Black history. And as someone who kind of wants to do the same with my own kind of like academic, nerdy kind of place, not really all that creative, but I was wondering, how do you stay motivated to keep doing all of this? Because, when going through those archives, a lot of it is not really fun to go through and fun to read again, and even current history, it's not really fun to look at that while you produce. So how do you, I guess, take care of yourself through your creative process and stay motivated to keep creating, writing about Black joy?
What is your area of interest that you're working on?
Geography.
Geography, okay. Do you want to? Okay, so how do you stay motivated? So yeah, it was really hard for me in particular when I was looking for examples of a queer sleeping car porter and looking at the Black community in Vancouver. I was in the Vancouver City Archives, for example, and looking through mugshots. That was really, it was brutal because I learned so much. But at the same time, I was looking at people in distress and in pain, and there was no, you never found out what happened to them. And I guess I guess, you know, my mission became, and it sounds so loosey-goosey, but it was like, I'm gonna save you, I'm gonna redeem you, I'm going to make this better. You know, I'm gonna make sure you have a happy ending, you know, even though those people are long dead. But I think as a writer, I think as a scholar, you can very much think about, well, what if? You know, and how can I change this now? And actually just talking about those people now, that is a way of, you know, doing right by them, I think, rather than having them buried in criminal records in an archive. That was pretty much all I could do, and that was why I was devoted. I was absolutely going to have a happy ending because I saw so much sadness. But you know what's also interesting when I was going through those archives was, you know, there's the official way that people live, or you're told the way they live, and then there's how they actually live, and you can see that in criminal records. So there was a whole group of people who had gone to a big party at the Utopia Club, and then they'd been rounded up and you know, arrested and put in jail or fined. And I was like, what was going on at that party? You know? And how was it worth it for them to go and do that? And so, you know, that was really interesting to me, was figuring out, okay, why were people where they were? What were the choices that people made? And the other obstacle that I ran into more than once in different shapes was that I was told that, you know, so this is a spoiler, but kind of not, that, you know, so Baxter has a sexual liaison, a very fun sexual liaison with a passenger on the train. And I was told, you know, in no uncertain terms by more than one person that that could never happen. Porter would never do that. He would never do that.
What?
Because he, you know, it was against the law, it was bad, he would be fired. And it's like, of course, you know, when you think about it, well, murder is not a good idea, yet people do it, right? So, of course he's going to do it, and of course people did do it, they were just smart enough to not get caught. So, a lot of it is kind of the what ifs. You know, what if? And what can I do to make this better? And actually just talking about it is making it better, I think. You know, having this conversation, having a beautiful cover like this, you know, which is aspirational, I think you just thinking about it makes it better. I don't know if that helps at all.
I don't know, I wanted Suzette to go because I don't know if my answer's kind of demoralizing. I tell people it's true, but I actually hate writing. I really hate it. I don't like doing it. It's awful. It's an awful practice, really. I agree with George Orwell. In George Orwell's diaries, Orwell says writing a book is like having a long illness that you survive. I think he's dead ass. That's exactly how it is. So there's a couple people here from the Writer's Studio. When I was directing the Writer's Studio, I said that to the class once, and one of the students was really incensed. He's like, so the director of the Writer's Studio hates writing? I love writing in the abstract. I don't like writing the verb. But what I do love is I love having written, like having push through it. On the other side, it's really awesome walking around.
Thank you for your generosity and not demoralizing us right away. It's very kind of you. He's right, but yeah. Nisha, you had a question?
My question is for Wayde. I think as a graphic novelist, when you're scripting from nonfiction materials, especially with a history that maybe has different accounts or doesn't have a visual account, or maybe it was passed down in oral forms. I'm wondering how you visualize the script for that, and also how you represent the authenticity of those histories without like leaving room for other people's interpretations as well. Because these histories, I think, are ongoing. Many of us are from generations where the histories like maybe passed down still, or that we know people who are researching them.
Yeah, in the case of my graphic novel, it's a real fantasy terrain. So it's loosely based on historical things, but it's really an imaginary world with, you know, magical creatures and stuff like that. So it's not a one-for-one that way. But still, you know, visualizing it was an amazing process working with April. So April Delanoche Milne is the illustrator, and so that was a whole new kind of. I love collaborating as a writer. That's another thing. Maybe collaborating is fun. Because collaborating is another way to say other people do some of the work, and so it's a little bit less work. But that was neat because I'd never done it that way, where I, you know, written it out and sort of imagined it. But then, you know, you don't have to imagine everything. But for April, she had to imagine everything because she's like, well, what do the buildings look like? What do the trees look like? What is it? And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't think of these things, right? But we had to do that, right? Together, we sort of had to figure out what will this world look like, and then she, pulled most of the duty on that, figuring out how characters looked and how people looked, and whether it's set in sort of fairy tale medieval land or something else entirely. Those were really interesting questions that came up. The funny thing about it, this is different from your question, I guess, but the funny thing about it for me was that what happened partway through the project was, so scripting it out, and then her illustrating the roughs, the first round of roughs, like the black and white panel, sort of laying out how the panels will go, and then showing me that, made me see a gap in the storyline that I couldn't see when it was just in script form. And so I had to go, I said, wait, there's a few more pages that have to be written, and I wrote a whole middle section that was basically the backstory of Lacuna's character that's not in the original prose version. And it's still a bit mysterious to me how that worked and why telling it as a visual story changed the story. It seemed to need a backstory. It needed a flashback in the way that the prose version didn't. So the collaboration is I think creates a third thing, which is really quite beautiful.
All right, so yeah, that's kind of the end of our formal program. And I mean, you can stay, of course. You can stay, please stay. But I mean, to invite you to buy books. But can we have another round of applause for Khari?